Continuing series Kenya at 50, tonight we take an in-depth look at the war on tribalism 50 years after independence. What ignited tribalism, and have we made any strides to cure the disease? Here is Betty Kialo with tonight's Kenya at 50.
Kenya, beautiful landscapes, the wildlife, our sandy beaches, diverse cultures, industrious people. 50 years on, and it is evident that Kenyans have indeed fought and won many battles. However, one remains to be a thorn in our flesh: the untamed dragon of tribalism. Before the coming of the colonialists, Kenyan tribes lived in their own distinct areas with their own cultures. Tribalism was a word that never featured in discussions and conversations because it was almost non-existent. It is only after the coming of the British colonialists that the differences of Kenyan tribes were magnified through the divide and rule principle, prompting conflicts whereby communities began to distrust and as a result fight each other. This, according to experts, served as the beginning of negative tribal stereotypes.
When the British are going away in 1963 or in the early 60s, they are just about to go away, we face the challenge of what kind of future they are going to usher us into. Immediately, you see that there are two major communities, the Kikuyu and the Luo, who want a unitary centrist state. They form their party, which is the Kenya African National Union, KANU. And then you have other people who think that they belong to small tribes like the Maasai, the Kalenjin, the Mijikenda, the Abaluya, the Turkana, and others, who say we are going to be dominated by the Kikuyu and the Luo, and we don't want that. We would like a regionalized kind of government, and therefore we form our own party.
44 years after independence, and the impact of tribalism was like a punishment painfully felt during the post-election violence of 2007-2008, in which 1,300 people lost their lives, while more than 600,000 lost their homes. Many families were affected. Neighbors who once lived in harmony viewed one another differently. Husbands killed their wives. Relatives turned against those that did not share their tribe. Rosemary Njuguna, a former resident of Eldoret, had to run for dear life after her neighbors turned against her husband, who was of a different tribe.
Ilipofika sasa campaign inaanza, tukaona watu wana change. Vile walikuwa natusalamia, ukaona ya kwamba mtu anakupita. Sasa sisi tukaanza kujiuliza what is going on. Lakini hatukujua abruptly, tulikaa tukaona watu they are changing kabisa. Ukaona ya kwamba hata vile mtu ulikuwa na wewe ndio unasalamia mtu, na hata ukisalamia unasikia salamu zake ni baridi sana.
Rosemary says she would like to go back home, where together with her husband, they had built their house for their children on a 7-acre piece of land, plants she ponders on every day. Joyce Cheriot, whose story was recently featured on KTN, is another victim of the tribal clashes in 2007. Hers is a painful memory of how a gang of young men from one tribe raided her home, burning her face and slaughtering her husband right before her eyes.
Jamaa wakaingia kwetu mlangoni karibu 20. So mzee Wesley Cheriot alishikwa hapo na akafungwa mikononi mwake na akaanza kukata mzee one by one hadi kutoa siri yake ya ndani na kukata shingo.
She says that as much as she has forgiven her assailants, her scars are an affirmation that Kenyans must never again turn against one another because of ethnicity. Tribalism has over the years infiltrated voting patterns in Kenya, largely along tribal lines. The best example, according to experts, being the alliance of Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto from the Kikuyu and Kalenjin communities, whose unity saw them clinch the presidency.
The people whom you see wielding and exercising political power in Kenya today, whether they are in government or they are in the opposition, they have arrived in those places riding on the tribal horse. They have arrived there on the tribal bandwagon.
After taking power, President Uhuru Kenyatta made a promise to Kenyans that his government will have what he described as the face of Kenya, and the appointment of his cabinet secretaries was his first test.
Our first nominee,
an exercise that took him weeks, and in the end the leaders came from different tribes, something experts say was the first success of his regime.
Now, tribalism has been blamed for, among other things, violence, corruption and underdevelopment, and 50 years on after independence, it still is a thorn in our flesh. Experts say one of the ways that this disease can be cured is if all communities are given equal opportunities to share power and resources. Betty Kyalo, KTN.